We're going to cover the bracketing process of starting a KO or starting a Swiss or bracketed Swiss. This particular example is a KO. So we currently have 123 teams that have been sold. And we assume the last entry's been sold, and what we're going to do now is the bracketing. The bracketing is the art of assigning the right number of teams to the right number of brackets. There is no science to it. Obviously, it's divisible by 16. That's great, but you've only got a 1 in 16 chance that is going to be the case. So let's look at this screen and describe what is going on. Everything is controlled from the right side, this screen over here. This lets us change the number of teams in each bracket. What is shown on the left-hand side is the current assignment. So if I go back to how it initially looks. Now, as a DIC, what I'm looking at here is I know that there is a non-divisible by 16. So I'm looking at 11 tables in the last bracket. Now, the politics of what number of teams is going to be in which bracket, that typically is up to the DIC. What normally tends to happen is that you'll look for good breaks. You know that you need 5 rings. So if we look up here, this is the default information. We have 123 teams. By default, we have 8 brackets, but within those 8 brackets, we have 5 rings. Now, how those 5 rings are going to get assigned is up to the DIC. So we normally, for a smaller KO, you may want to have a fewer number of teams. So let's look at what's in bracket 1 here. This is the average number of team master points along with the team number. On the left, we have got little blue numbers just to show you that it goes down to 16. The problem that we run into is a lot of people will run on a smaller screen. Unfortunately, that's why I've made this screen nice and tall and wide. But when you run on a smaller screen, you have a problem in being able to see the bottom of the bracket. So in this case, it looks like there are only 14 teams and you can't see it. That's the reason that we have 2 sets of red lines. The first one is a thin red line, and it's followed by a much thicker red line to show that you're at the end of the bracket. So if you do not see a red line, it means that there's more to come. If you see the first red line, you know that there's one more red line to come. And that is important for TDs who are working on a smaller screen. So that is the reason that we have the numbers down the left-hand side. And then because of the way HTML works, they're only on the first set. This is a large KO. It's not many events that will need to scroll down. But do make sure that you see that both red lines. I will go back and make this screen nice and tall so that we can see it. Second thing to note is here is the estimated number of master points for first place for that bracket. That may affect your calculations or it may not. To change a number is over on the right hand side. So if I wanted to make 11 teams in bracket 3, it'll go make that change. There are little buttons, so if I go back to that 11, suppose I decide I want to make it 12 to go up, so just there it will change up. When it changes, you'll see that it pushes down, so I only have 15 in the last bracket. So that's the way. Increase this to 13, takes it from the last bracket. So the way to work this screen is to start with bracket 1 and to work your way down. If I wanted to change this 13 to 15, the quickest way of doing it is to actually type in the 15. If I was to use the arrow, so right now I'm going to go from 13 to 14. If you watch, there'll be the computer will think for a little bit whilst it does the reassignment, thinking, and I have to wait for it to be redisplayed. So every time I click a button and change it, it's going to think and change. It is much quicker, much more efficient to type in the number if you're going to change it by more than one. So an example, let's say I want bracket 4 to be 12 teams instead of the last bracket. I am going to change it here. Now, this is called the input focus. So whilst I have the input focus in there, by moving the mouse outside of it, the input focus moved and that changed. So if I was to change this to 12 and not do anything, no changes are going to be made until the input focus moves outside of that window. So I can do that by clicking outside the window. I'm going to press the tab key to go to the next field. And so that's when the calculation actually happens. So changing the number in here and not moving the mouse or not doing anything has no effect until the cursor leaves the screen. You see what happened there is it created an additional bracket. The ACBO rules is you're allowed to create one more than the minimum number of brackets. So I may decide, just because of the layout of the number of master points, or I may have worked out that I can generate more master points for the players by having 9 brackets instead of 8. If I want to go back to the original default, I can just click on auto bracket. Just have to wait whilst it makes those changes. And what it's doing now, it's going back to the default. The default is that bracket 1 will be full, bracket 2 will be full, and it will keep filling the brackets until the last bracket. What this means, let's say we were to go add 6 more teams. So I'll go back to the entries page. I'm in a training mode, so I can quickly add 6 more teams. So I have 129 teams now, which is one more. Go back to this bracketing screen. And you'll see it's put one team in the last bracket. Obviously, that's not going to be acceptable, but it's up to you as the DIC to decide exactly how you want to configure it. In this column, you will see, supposing we wanted to change the number of brackets. And this lets me add additional brackets. And you can see what I'm doing now is by starting at bracket 6, I'm pushing the number of teams down so that we can start putting some into the final bracket. Now, watch what just happened then. I started at bracket 6 and was working my way down. Now I went to bracket 3. The way the software works is it's going to push down those 4 tables until the next available bracket to fill it. So you should always start at the highest bracket that you want to change. So you see when I change this to 12, it's going to take those from bracket 8. So it's going to take me a little while to push available tables down to that final bracket. Now, when I am done with the brackets, so this may not be perfect, but it is acceptable. When I'm done, I click on Done with Bracketing, or I can just go directly to the matching screen. These 2 buttons do the same thing. The reason for having them separately is this is a general menu. You can always go to different places, and we wanted a button to be able to make it obvious to the director what to do next, so to speak. So typically you'll be done with the bracketing. This bracket alignment will save itself until any changes are made. For example, if you add a team or delete a team. So one tip is whilst you are selling entries, so here you are on the entries screen, supposing it gets to about a minute before game time, and sometimes there'll often be a lull, particularly later in the week for a tournament. If there is a lull in the entries, that is the time to go to the bracketing screen and decide how you would like the brackets to look. Reason for doing that is that supposing you do have no more entries, your bracketing is already complete, the matching is random, and we can go directly to the tabling screen. And in this case, we see we have more teams than available. So add more teams to the inventory. So by being proactive and looking at the bracketing whilst we're still selling entries, as soon as the last entry is sold, we can be ready and publish straight away. So that covers the inventory steps. So I'm sorry, the bracketing steps for starting a KO. Or the same applies for a Swiss and bracketed Swiss.